Good morning and welcome. We really appreciate all of you who've turned up so bright and early. Actually, coffee is on its way. So hopefully there'll be enough for everybody. This is, as you can gather, we are doing this thing amongst friends, and there's a level of informality with the colloquium, and it was really a wonderful afternoon yesterday and last night. I think we really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that today it's also going to be an amazing day. We have really incredible people here. I am so happy and honored that this colloquium has also become really a very much a collaborative effort, and a collaborative effort not just amongst the faculty at the GSD and also people outside, but very much also the faculty at Harvard. And it's been great to have had this opportunity to discuss this colloquium with Professor Diana Sorensen, who is the Dean of Humanities here at Harvard, who will be moderating this first session and introducing the speakers. So please welcome Professor Diana Sorensen.
Thanks so much, Moisen, and thank you for always finding ways to connect the different schools here at Harvard through the power of ideas, which is what we're all here for. For me, this is a lot of fun, and I look forward to a very interesting session in an area about which I know quite little, because I'm a literary scholar of Latin America, not an architect who builds real things. The first speaker is Professor Felipe Correa, who's assistant professor in the Department of Urban Planning and Design, and the director of the Urban Design Degree Program. Felipe's most recent research focuses on resource extraction models within the South American continent and the effect of those models on urbanization. Other recent, I'm giving away your talk. Other recent research initiatives have focused on Andean topography and its imprint on the Latin American city, and on New Orleans and its forms of exchange with the material forces of the Mississippi River. In association with Joan Busquets, Correa conducted Cities 10 lines. I just read the X's across, so it just seemed more mobile. Yes. A project-based investigation that documents and evaluates the most salient design strategies that inform contemporary urban projects. Most recently, he co-edited with Jorge Silvetti, Invention, Transformation, Strategies for the Katara Jimmy Oases in Al Ain, a comprehensive study of the role of the oasis in the 21st century city. So with no further ado, please welcome Professor Correa.
Okay. Okay, well, good morning. Very glad to be here and to be the first presenter. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. On Quito. Levitating at 10,000 feet above sea level and secluded under an equatorial sky and immured by Alexander von Humboldt's famous Avenue of the Volcanoes, San Francisco de Quito is an urban ensemble with a unique and highly animate morphology that has resulted from a time-honored relationship between multiple models of settlement and its incredibly robust topography. Driven by the pervasive presence of the mountains, the most salient forms of urbanism that have shaped the city have predominantly acknowledged this terrain's unique sectional figure and effectively operated in between its paradoxical condition as established metropolis and new frontier. Given this framework, today I would like to present three specific models of settlement. three critical projects that have set the stage for diverse models of urban life throughout the city's 500 years of colonial and post-colonial urban history, many of which are still quite operative today within the formal and social structures of the city. These three projects are, one, the foundational project and description of the law of Indies in the Andean landscape, the mid-20th century expansion of the city with the arrival of modernity, fueled by the discovery of oil in the Ecuadorian Amazon, and finally, the third project, one in the making, which is the draping of the city into its adjacent lower valleys, catalyzed by the current construction of the new airport. The three projects, all with very diverse scopes and ambitions, share one continuous struggle, which is a constant desire for horizontality in a geography where the horizon is never a straight line. Before I go into each of the specific projects, I just wanted to briefly sort of define the location of the city in terms of its larger context and how it was selected, or how it sort of actually happened at 2,800 meters above sea level. And perhaps the choice of location initially for an Inca settlement, for an Indian settlement that was the northern post of the Incan Empire, it was a sectional condition. It was an ideal position where actually agricultural products from the highlands and the lowlands could actually be brought for it to be sold. For the Spaniards, the relation was much more planimetric, in which Quito became the middle post between Cartagena, the port of Cartagena, which was the point of arrival from Europe, and Lima, the capital of the Kingdom of Peru. This resulted in a very privileged location for Quito, because by the time the caravans arrived to Quito, half of the men were ill and many of the animals have died. So everything that was not essential did not continue to Lima, and non-essential items were primarily arts and books. So basically, Quito became a repository of art and culture throughout the 1500s and the 1600s, developing quite unique and intricate configurations of both art and architecture, with a particular sort of detailing in terms of the Baroque interior, and establishing very precise schools like the Escuela de Quito. Moving into the foundational project, dating to the 1530s, the foundation of Quito followed the 148 points, tightly scripted in the ordinance of the Law of Indies enacted by King Philip II. While on the one hand, Quito has the DNA of the most expansive city-making enterprise in the history of the Americas, more than 900 foundational towns defined by the Law of Indies, which is summarized in this map with a square in the middle, the administration and religious buildings around it, and then a parcel structure that divided an 100 by 100 square block into 4 parcels that then were defined by a courtyard structure, and which defined, I think, the urban plan of a multiplicity of cities: Buenos Aires, Lima, Mexico City, and of course Quito. But on the other hand, it also had a very unique set of operations to be fulfilled, primarily leveling and infilling in order to allow for the continuity of their grid to be maintained. 5 ravines, deep and heavily vegetated cavities that traverse the city along its east-west axis, were erased slowly to accommodate the inscription of the grid. The extension of the built mass along the ravines reveals particular distortions in plan, as some of the blocks had to thin out or widen in order to either evade the abysm or bridge the entire extent of the gorge. And as you can see here, sort of the 5 ravines, in this plan, north is in this direction, which follows the axis of the Law of Indies. You can see that the 5 ravines sort of were systematically infilled to be able to create a continuous platform that defined the colonial core. This resulted in an inconspicuous but expansive public works operation that allowed for the city to literally stage its desire for horizontality, establishing a very theatrical relationship between city and frontier, where you could actually begin to see that sort of by the drop middle ground, the city always remained as this continuous platform in relationship to the valley. A practice that continued all the way until the 1900s were certain public infrastructures, such as the very famous swimming pool El Sena, actually were also used to bridge over ravines and create this effect of continuous horizontality. And then moments where the technology did not allow for to continue to expand the city and began to define very precise borders or edges between the city, and wilderness. This sort of desire for horizontality also begins to reappear at the scale of specific architecture, and in particularly in the definition of public space, where to be able to maintain a continuous horizontal sort of plan, larger monumental buildings such as the Convento de San Francisco began to create this sort of odd adaptation to the typology, which was an entrepiso with what they called covachas, which were these small stores that served as a market in the public space, and then created a more formal public space above, which was the entry point to the convent. And that still, in many ways, operates today, where the lower plaza is a much more sort of, it's a space much more sort of the people, and then there's a larger formal entry point into the museum and the convent. The second project that I would like to present today is the modern expansion. And the colonial model of the historic core, driven by infill and leveling, remained as the main focus of urban life until the late 1930s. In the 1930s, the discovery of oil in the coast of Ecuador and the suspicion of oil in the Ecuadorian Amazon brought into the city an unprecedented flow of capital. And with it, a particular spirit of late modernity, which completely changed the city in relation to its colonial structure and its topography. Two key figures define this moment. One is the Swiss architect Maurice Bernard, who was asked by the Ecuadorian consul in Geneva to submit a proposal for a renewed central plaza in the historic core. His proposal, completely modern in its conception, consisted of a double plaza flanked by two bar buildings, a break away from the colonial courtyard morphology, allowing for visual continuity in the interior of the block. The project was never built, yet it clearly marked a change of attitude towards urbanity in the city and began to mark sort of certain traits in terms of a new project that would begin to define the expansion of the city. The second, and perhaps much more influential figure, was Guillermo Jones Odriozola, a 22-year-old architecture student from Uruguay, who in 1942 traveled throughout South America instead of Europe due to the war, and who upon arrival in Quito convinced the municipal council to let him propose a pilot plan for the city. Having just received books by Patrick Abercrombie from London, his plan for Quito was a hybrid between axial boulevards and neighborhood units, with primarily garden city densities in its residential quarters. There's a historic core, and then that's the expansion towards the north. And as you can see, his plan begins to tie a series of neighborhood units that began to sort of bring together the fracturing of farmland into coherent sort of units, and then tied together by very sort of monumental boulevards that are still sort of very present in the city today. The logic of neighborhood units in relation to the larger plan, and sort of something that was actually very successful within this plan is that it also began to appropriate a lot of the ravines as a form of public space. And even though it was primarily conceived in plan, there was a certain understanding of the sectional quality of the city as it actually moved towards its extension. The implementation of the Odriozola plan throughout the 40s and 50s left behind the figural presence of the continuous block in favor of a new logic where the geometry of the block was the result of the negotiation between street and the varying resistance of the slope. This resulted in a modern expansion that was much more driven by parcel structure than built mass, and yielded a sprinkled fabric of repetitive yet discontinuous objects. And if we actually begin to look at these photographs that are very small, these sort of the northern part of the city continues to operate even today with this paradigm of sort of the neighborhood units and the zones and regulations that were defined sort of much more with the ideals of the garden city, in which sort of villas with a garden have been sort of torn down and point towers have been sort of raised, but the point towers are always defined as an object within the parcel rather than beginning to define a larger sort of system of fabric within the city. So in reality, a city, there's a historic core, there's the city throughout the valley. Today, a city that at first hand might be perceived as extremely dense is actually extremely overextended, but actually rather hollow in its composition. Finally, the third project, one in its early stages, involves the draping of the city into the lower valley. The valley, 500 meters below the 20th century city, is composed of large plateaus divided by gorges that act as overscaled haha fences. While visually continuous due to the panoramic effect of the topography, these altiplanos require huge investment in infrastructure, primarily bridging, in order to be physically connected. As farmland continues to be transformed into dispersed gated communities, the toll on mobility infrastructure, primarily roads, is reaching a breaking point. The construction of the new airport in Yaruquí, in the exact same site selected by La Condamine and the French Geodesic Mission to establish the baseline that allowed them to measure the curvature of the Earth, represents a major directional shift in the urban paradigm of the city. Once the airport opens, the traditional north-south axis along the Quito Valley will rapidly be supplanted by a new east-west cross-valley axis, defining the stage for Quito's 21st century project for urban life. The challenge of a renewed relationship between city and valley, put forth by the airport under construction, will be a complex and contested process that will undoubtedly unfold in the next few years. Throughout this process, topography will once again play a critical role. A critical understanding of the sectional instrumentality of the ravines is essential in order to project a new model of urban life for the valley, one that both establishes affinities with the particularities of this terrain, but also becomes complementary to the city above, rather than simply becoming a weaker replica of it. If in the 1700s, the French Geodesic Mission used the Yaruquí baseline as the seed for a much more ambitious scientific enterprise, today we must use the exact same line as a point of departure for a much more ambitious urban enterprise than the airport itself. It's from this line itself that the Quito of the 21st century must unfold. Thank you. I think your presentation, the first slide was, there we go. It was not in the first slide.
Now you can see me. Introducing Jorge Silvetti at the Graduate School of Design is, shall I say, for me, an opportunity not to tell you what you don't know, but to celebrate his great distinction. And may I be, for a split second, a proud Argentine. It's not a common experience. So Professor Silvetti is a Nelson Robinson Jr. Professor of Architecture here, where he has taught since 1975. Since '86, Jorge has directed a number of research programs, including one on the urbanism and architecture of Sicily, which won a Progressive Architecture Award. Other research programs include Buenos Aires 2000 on the future of public spaces in the changing Latin American metropolis, and another project on the Ria de Bilbao. Jorge has written on architectural theory, and his design work has been exhibited in museums and galleries worldwide. He was awarded, among numerous other awards, the American Academy Award in Rome. Since '96, he has served as a juror for the Pritzker Architectural Prize, and in 2000 he became a juror for the Mies van der Rohe Prize for Latin American Architecture. His firm, Machado and Silvetti Associates, was founded in 1974, and it has received numerous honors for design projects. The firm was given the first award in architecture by the American Academy of Arts and Letters, just up the road. Its notable projects include work at many universities: Princeton, Harvard, Rice, Arizona State, the University of Arkansas, the University of Utah, the American University in Beirut, as well as a public library branch in Boston, a private development in Boston, and a new center of comparative archaeology at the Getty Villa in Malibu. Jorge, anxious to hear you.
Thank you so much, Diana. This is great to have you here. You know, we see each other often, but rarely at the Graduate School of Design. So this is a wonderful opportunity to host you here and then have a discussion about these two cities with you. And I will not accept what you said, that you come here and you know nothing about cities. You're a literary expert, and actually, at least Buenos Aires is probably one of the most literarily dealt with city in the world. You know a lot. Anyway, I'm going to read because I speak too much, and so I'm going to try to control myself. And indeed, talking with Felipe, and I actually Bill Saunders too last week about related themes, I refer to the particular fascination that for all of us, architects and urbanists, the study of Latin American cities has, given the fact that the immense majority of them are the result of a most remarkable process of foundation, one that is not only attractive because of its technical attributes, but also because of its scale. During the 16th and 17th century, Spain founded out of nothing all equally formed cities following a set of clear, simple rules spelled out in the laws of India. This is likely the largest, most ambitious and successful urbanization campaign ever in the history of civilization. There is no time today, nor is the topic in this presentation, to dwell on this most interesting aspect, historical aspect that also Felipe just touched on. Let's retain the fact that all these cities share the same morphological origin, and then they take off in their difficult journey of becoming urbis by displaying more or less the same physical and symbolic attributes: the orthogonal square grid, the main plaza, around which you have the main church, the government buildings, etc., etc. The exceptions, deviations to the set of common attributes, come, of course, from specific needs, like special defense, but more importantly, from the pre-existing topographical conditions that characterize the sites where they were founded, which brings me closer to the topic I want to start with, and of course that Felipe just basically focused on. 2 weeks ago, during a 5-day stopover with my students in Rio de Janeiro, and on my way to Buenos Aires, I was struck by the impact that original geographic conditions have on cities. While in Rio, I was already conjuring up images of Buenos Aires, the city of my childhood on the Rio de la Plata, while navigating the complex, exuberant, and monumental topography of the Brazilian metropolis. And it became altogether clear to me that what I should talk about as an architect, an urbanist, was the struggle of the imagination that Buenos Aires had to engage in order to overcome the meager, stingy opportunities for distinction that the site offered to it. In fact, it is interesting to note that for precisely opposite reasons, both Rio de Janeiro and Buenos Aires, arguably two of the major and competing metropolises of South America, emerged, developed, and succeeded in establishing their unique and remarkable urban identities in locations where no city should have ever been attempted to exist. Why put Rio in what is probably the most abrupt, almost violent eruption on its shoreline by not just hills or even mountains, but what appears as unsurmountable, monumental, colossal rocks that leave as leftover spaces, usually narrow passages meandering swampy flatlands as the only option for human settlements? And then, why establish Buenos Aires, a harbor city on the west bank of the Rio de la Plata, in what must be one of the flattest territories on Earth, where it was almost impossible to establish any discernible boundary between water and land, or any distinguishable topographical, geographical, or natural event that may give a city a starting point to define its identity. This minimalism and abstraction of this landscape, Quito, is that what you were aspiring for? Of course, would be one of the characteristics that in fact defines ultimately its personality, cultural character, and even its metaphysical nature, and a symbol itself of its uniqueness. But that is only achieved through an excruciating process of intellectual, political, and artistic elaboration and transformation. While Rio, no matter what architectural or urban achievements or monuments it creates, and there are plenty of them, would remain forever a city that is remembered for images defined by its natural topography, Buenos Aires would have to struggle to create memorable figures that are imposed on it as it dropped from the sky, inserted by force, or violently cut out from or tattooed in its body. Not surprisingly, Le Corbusier, in his life-changing trip to South America in 1929, makes sketches of his ideas for Rio and Buenos Aires in very revealing drawings. He uses perspectives, 3D representations, to imagine Rio, while he represents Buenos Aires just in section and going over the river, as you see in the lower section, and elevation, emphasizing its flatness and using solely architecture, repeating 5 equal slabs, thus underlying the repetitiveness and monotony of the grid to create its image of a modern city. It is not surprising then that Buenos Aires' origins are plagued with difficulties, to put it mildly. Better said, with calamities, tragedy, and extinction, to be more blunt. In fact, Buenos Aires has 2 foundations. The first, in the year 1536, by Pedro de Mendoza, an expedition that fails to take hold, plagued by famine and hostility by the local populations of nomadic Querandíes. The settlement is abandoned as the surviving conquistadores barely manage to escape to Asunción, up north in the Paraná River. There are, however, a few points to make about these foundations that are important for our story. The original first Buenos Aires is not the product of a real foundation. It's not a fundación en regla, doesn't follow the rules of the Indias, and so, objectively, its consequences are, on the one hand, that it is not built as a defensible settlement, and on the other, that there is no official record as to its exact location and configuration, and therefore one of the painful mysteries that does not allow Buenos Aires to ever construct its own myth of origin. More subjectively and poetically, this illegitimate, should I say bastard origin, would mark this episode of shame as a mark of opprobrium, and might account for its subsequent erasure from Buenos Aires' urban consciousness. There exists, however, a series of descriptions, and fortunately the first written account of the Spanish colonies in South America by a German mercenary, Ulrico Schmidl, who miraculously survives all the vicissitudes and horrendous odysseys by going up and down the Paraná River, and who managed to return to Europe and publish them with great success. The second and successful foundation by Juan de Garay occurs in 1580, with all the rituals, documentation, and modest pomp, as reflected in this 19th century painting, recreation, that it was required by the laws of India. This is the first known plan of the city, 3 years after its foundations, 1583, with the assignment of properties to individuals, the locations of the Plaza Mayor, the municipal and imperial offices, the cathedral and the churches and major religious orders, convents, all represented with the most bureaucratic, indifferent way, but which poignantly describes the character of this squalid city. What is important is that it clearly manifests the congruence between the flatness of the terrain, the lack of real limits or boundaries of the territory, and the superimposition of a square orthogonal grid implying in its indifference the possibility of an infinite growth both inland and also over water, a condition that would dominate the urban thinking of the centuries to come, and which would guide interventions and inform critiques of Buenos Aires' inevitable and at times prodigious city's growth. At this point, a few things to notice. There is only one topographical 3D feature that is present, the mild hill that forms a continuous, again monotonous border to the city up, and the definition of the floodplain, low areas between it and the river, ambiguous line, a fact accurately described in more contemporary topographic marks. I'm referring to this, this parallel line to the shoreline, which is really a mild topographical condition, a few meters above the flood lines. If we jump, and this is, the topography, which of course when you look at this map you think that this is a phenomenal topography, but in fact we're talking about very slight differences between lines. If we jump to the plan of 1859 with the ecclesiastical division of the city in parishes, we see more clearly the presence of this mild feature, but also as important, the inclusion of another features that had not yet been present in any map. The Vuelta de Rocha, the first meander of the river, the little river on the left, and the two long piers that start from the custom house built next to the center of the city and really reaching out into the river to overcome and bridge, as it were, the shallowness of it and provide a better access. We also noticed in that plan, if you look closely, the widening of some streets, creating a larger grid that would serve to channel better traffic, to orient oneself better, to begin to establish boundaries, where neighborhoods will acquire very distinctive physical and social characteristics very soon. In this map, I would also like to locate the two hypotheses where the first city might have been located. From the accounts of Schmidl and other indirect documents, all the way to the present, with the still unresolved question as to where exactly that settlement stood, scholars believe the first city to be located in all likelihood in or around the only area that is in proximity to something that has the resemblance of a natural harbor to protect and access the ships. It is hard to reconstruct the exact topography of the early 16th century, but the Riachuelo, the little river on the left, which has already a sort of name that's this little Rio, Riachuelo, a kind of dejectionary sort of a term, and what today is called Vuelta de Rocha, that first meander, which they both have always existed. Both offers close to the shore and which have always existed. Both offers from its beginnings the best conditions for that, for a natural harbor. Research today oscillates until recently between the location of the original city either on the High Line, today a park, or in the flooding plains below, which is actually the favorite hypothesis today. But all coincide that the Vuelta de Rocha and the Boca del Riachuelo these were two sure places that were occupied in the first foundation. But what is also true and revealed clearly, by all these maps up to this point is that once the first unfortunate foundation disappears, an urban amnesia takes place, an amnesic occurrence that we confirm in each graphic representation for the next 3 centuries. The effacement of this part of the city's geography in no map during this long period, La Vuelta de Rocha, nor the vibrant area around it that never ceased to be active in relation to navigation, commerce, and trade, smuggling, and early industrial development, no one of that is represented. Only through other types of records we know about this active reality, as if a site cursed by its calamitous origins under constant threat of flooding, and as the shameful locus of most intense smuggling activities in the Spanish colonies between the Portuguese, the Spaniards, and the English, was better erased from records and collective memories. What had happened is that as the relative important industrial activity in a poor colonial outpost, as the one in the Rio de la Plata, and I say poor when compared with Mexico or Peru, of course, the Vuelta de Rocha is the place where salt works, tanning industries, shipyards, and all associated trades are located, all dirty, smelly, poor, and worse, I guess, were well before the large European immigration of the end of the 19th century and the beginnings of the 20th century took place. An early wave of immigrants from Italy around 1830, coming specifically from the region of Liguria and its main city, Genoa, arrived and settled. And like with any immigration wave, many things came with it besides language and cuisine. With it came the difference that an urban society appeared to need to establish its identity. To assert this point, and as it having an urbanist consciousness from the outset, this settlement at the mouth of the Riachuelo, La Boca del Riachuelo, begins to distinguish itself from the real city with the most basic and strong of all urbanistic marks that can be afforded in this location. It develops its own grid. So suddenly, on a map of 1862, we see the full development of what appears to be an independent town, which makes the most of its unique topographical condition. It reorients its grids as it chooses and settles where no other part of the city had dared to touch, let alone remember. In the flooding plains a few meters below the rest of the city where the original cursed first foundation had occurred. In addition, it relates directly to the configuration of the river, the Riachuelo, and with these two distinctive physical characteristics, and to which we should also add the ethnic distinctiveness of their Italian population, it begins to attract as a magnet, and to this day, additional elements that would reinforce over and over again this otherness, starting with a purely infrastructural work we notice on this plan, the construction of the railroad connecting two harbors, and we know railroads at level in cities are divisions, and so that really effectively defines this as an island. So the railroad connecting the two harbors, the Vuelta de Rocha and the main official harbor. The town of La Boca del Riachuelo emerges as the most specific and distinct response to the incipient metropolis just a few hundred meters away. Only after the other, and I need now to go very, very fast in what are amazing decades of parallel stories, that of Buenos Aires as it becomes the city we know today, and La Boca, the other city that evolves its own identity as a necessary counterpart, being at times a veritable subconsciousness of the larger city. Thus, La Boca, as it's called by now for short, evolves its difference in the social, cultural, physical, and political spheres anchored in its different history and topography. Its ethnic makeup correlates to precise socio-economical stratum. La Boca, the other city that gets flooded when the river conspires with the clouds and the winds. These are wonderful photographs, by the way, by Zimmerman. Is one of the poorest neighborhoods of low-income laborers and their families associated with the harbor activities. The socio-political agendas that this characterization promotes aligns La Boca and its inhabitants with the most active and outspoken of the labor union movements of the world at the time, being the first precinct of Buenos Aires. Let's remember has always been administratively and politically part of the whole city, and of the continent to elect a socialist congressman in 1905. And at this time, of course, socialism means orthodox, active, radical Marxism, with all its consequence products, newspapers, magazines, labor associations, cultural and charitable organizations, and historical events such as important strikes and political rallies. Not surprisingly, early in the 20th century, it is the birth of one of the most genuine and strong avant-garde schools of modern paintings in South America at the time, La Escuela de Pintura de La Boca, a contester to academicism, to the reigning academicism, led by Benito Quinquela Martin, appropriately an orphan, reared first by nuns and later by a mixed Italian-Indian family, who becomes the symbol and voice of the neighborhood as it captures the new industrial working class unique character of its neighborhood. And this is La Vuelta de Rocha in the 1920s and 30s. And beautiful photographs, and creates this special, he declares the Republic of La Boca and creates the shield that you see there, having the harbor, the boats, painting, and labor as their symbols. All these differences manifest itself too in how the Boquenses, as they are known, perceive themselves. In 1882, this is an anecdote that I think is actually quite telling. In 1882, due to a local labor dispute that was dragging and affected the larger economy, the president of Argentina at the time, Julio Argentino Roca, decides to intervene, and the workers of La Boca meet in one of their charitable institutions, La Sociedad Italiana, and decide that, and I quote, the Argentinian government cannot interfere in Genoese affairs. They are still being Genoese after, 70 years more, almost 100 years. They raise the flag of the city of Genoa and sign a declaration. So far, it sounds like a joke, but sign a declaration that is sent to the King of Italy, informing him that they have just formed the Republic of La Boca. While a dissident group of strikers, as a countermeasure, renames the most important street of the neighborhood the name of the president, Roca. As Graciela Silvestri says in her magnificent book, El Color del Río, The Color of the River, with these acts, both groups officially identify La Boca as a specific space in the city and also as a specific community, in one case identified as a part of Italy, the other by producing that characteristical foundational act par excellence that establishes identity, that of naming a place. Now, to speak about painting is to speak about color. And to speak about color in La Boca is also to speak about La Boca as a distinctive architectural fabric from the rest of Buenos Aires for the color and type of architecture. And let's stay there, actually. Leftovers from shipping corrugated metal sheets used as ballast and as packaging, and odd ends of painting cans constitutes the origin of this very particular and by now a bit overdone condition, which the neighborhood stock of houses is built in its origins, and is the final touch in the construction, one of the final touches in the construction of their visual identity, as the other architectural identities of the city were being constructed at the same time. I'm going to go fast now. Indeed, the Buenos Aires continues its expansion in the infinite plain of the Pampas. We are seeing actually Buenos Aires in the horizon in the 1920s. Streets shooting into the void, Buenos Aires again in the horizon, and its architecture taking more and more distinctive characters. These are all photographs from Coppola of the 1930s that begin to define neighborhoods, begin to define its sort of French flavor, its Spanish flavor in another areas, as we will see later, and also the typical middle class expansion as represented by another Argentinian invention, La Casa Chorizo, the sausage house, one-story house that begins to cover and extend into the Pampas and extend this city again into the horizon. Of course, the grid dissipates and dissolves itself in the ever-expanding margins of the city as this gigantic, monstrous head must accommodate the arrivals from the north, west, and south of the rest of the country's territory, the lines of transportation infrastructure. These are railroads. These distortions of the grid create urban events and define neighborhood social configurations and networks, but when an image of the scale of the metropolis requires more deliberate, violent, surgical interventions, mutilations, erasures ensued during the first 3 decades of the 20th century at great pains and cost. These are actually the arrivals of the railroads on Buenos Aires. The first, the Avenida de Mayo, at the end of the 19th century, cutting through the fabric, as you see there, from the government palace. The river is on the right, and to the new capital, the Congress, at the end of the axis. You see there the work, the upper plan of the cutting of the fabric of the city to establish this avenue. And the first, with all these wonderful characteristics, the building of the first subway really in the continent on that avenue, with its careful alignment of Art Nouveau, Liberty, and modern buildings and skyscrapers. This is it's open in 1889. Later, after an ambitious plan of crisscrossing the city with diagonals, fortunately it wasn't done, 2 of them are built. You see Avenida de Mayo in the center and the 2 diagonals opening up from the center government of the city, are built with great precision in the early 1930s to complete the start of long vistas that change the scale of the city. And finally, with great effort and costs, the opening of the transversal Avenida 9 de Julio. Porteños, the inhabitants of Buenos Aires are very proud to say always is the widest avenue in the world. It's a whole block that is just removed. And you have it on the right. Everything is like that. Nothing is mild. So the opening of the Avenida Nueva Julio and the building of its most distinctive yet silent and abstract monument, El Obelisco. There we have the construction of the avenue. The obelisk, a solitary counterpoint to the abstract orthogonal grid that rather than offering a vantage point to observe the city, seems to be always observing us and the rest of the herbs as life takes place at its feet. For La Boca, we can say that the final touch, which would forge forever its unique imaginary of place that other than Buenos Aires, while at the same time allying the neighborhood forever with not just the city, but with the rest of the country and even beyond, is the definitive permanent establishment of the stadium of Boca Junior. We can say its only monument in its very heart in the late 30s. By an unlikely event in cities at that time, the seat of the most popular soccer team, that's the stadium, that's really how it's inserted in the fabric, of the most popular, the seat of the most popular soccer team of Argentina and perhaps the continent. Sorry, I'm a fan of it. But that takes its name from the neighborhood and which is the emblem of popular culture and passion. Embedded in the very fabric of La Boca, the stadium is an ever-present architectural, monumental, and symbolic artifact that summarizes with its colors the passion and identity of this most singular urban man, to date totally enwrapped in its own fantasy, a neighborhood that is an untouchable icon of Buenos Aires' own mythology. I have one more comment to make, if you give me the time. Is that okay? Yes. Music cannot be missing from this history, but you're not going to hear any. Well, that's the colors of La Boca, of course. From this history of parallel identities. Buenos Aires and La Boca, that of the mother and the daughter, as if were, the same blood and the same history, yet of different personalities, displaying oscillating moments of love and hate. Tango is the music that defines Buenos Aires, as blues does New Orleans and Fado or Lisbon. Tango was born and it still flourishes in Buenos Aires, and then again, two tangos composed around the 1920s, considered to be the two most famous tangos throughout the world, express this tense relationship of sympathies and differences. La Cumparsita, the most famous tangos of all that you all know, even if you don't know the name because you've heard it, emblematic hymn of Buenos Aires, speaks about La Comparsa, a group of costume masked people that formed and paraded during Carnival in the Avenida de Mayo, that traditionally in the heart of the city, the elegant sort of thoroughfare. The other, Caminito, translated as the little path, a tango that idealizes a street of La Boca with the same name. La Avenida de Mayo, the aristocratic new avenue, the first major urban effort of the city to modify its identity, to transform itself through urban interventions into a new city, a worldly city with subways and skyscrapers that opened up in 1889, made out of sober stone and steel. And in parallel, its counterpoint, Caminito, the meandering, colorful street of poor, proud immigrants, laborers, was the necessary counterpart of the city's identity and where its mythology was forged. Thank you.